The matchup with Jimmy Butler is over, but there's still plenty to say about the game and what's next for the Miami Heat. Rohan Nadkarni of NBC News joins us to talk about Butler's legacy, Bam becoming the face of the franchise, and LeBron James' recent comments about Pat Riley on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramill. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And before we jump in, a reminder that the next Locked On Heat watch party with our friends at the Taurus in Coconut Grove is this Saturday night, March 29th. Heat play the Sixers in Philadelphia. Come hang out with us, have some good food, drinks, watch the Heat with some friends at a great local drinking facility. Have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about the next face of the Heat franchise and LeBron's latest comments about Pat Riley that might confirm a rumor that's been out there. But first, we want to introduce our guest, Rohan Nadkarni, one of our favorites here. He covers sports at NBC News. And Rohan, I don't think we've talked since the trade deadline, since Jimmy Butler was traded. You've been pro Jimmy Butler basically through the entire process, though. I think that's a fair.
That's pretty fair.
Description.
Although, okay, first of all, back up for a second. I haven't been on, and you guys never invite me on to give out cookies. That feels like a real important part of the show. For some reason,
it's
I feel like
the
I
most
never get to
important
do
part
it.
of the show.
Well,
yeah.
in all fairness, there hasn't been a lot of winning, so there hasn't been a lot of cookie distribution. So I think that's where we're at right now.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Wes, because you said, pro Jimmy Butler, and obviously it's I can't really separate myself from the fact that I've written about Jimmy a lot and wrote about him a lot when I was at SI. I think the distinction I'd make, and I think it's important here, is it's less about being pro Jimmy Butler throughout all of this, and we'll get into the game last night and my feelings about it, and more it just takes a lot for me to be mad at a player for trying to get to the team they want to get to. And that's not to say that that there's nothing a player can do that would bother me, or that there's nothing that happened in the situation that bothered me personally, but just, and I tweeted about this earlier today, there have been many kind of quote unquote radicalizing moments for me covering this league about why I'm so staunchly on the player's side in this issue. Whenever the Warriors get sold, whether it's 10 years from now or 30 years from now, and it's $10 billion, $15 billion, and Steph Curry won't see a cent of that money. You could be Dwayne Wade and handle everything perfectly. You could be the model citizen for a franchise, and you still will not get the money you feel like you deserve, and your relationship with your front office can still break down. To me, it's your career as a player is so short, and as much as people will talk about these contracts, your value is still a fraction of what this league generates in revenue. There's just so much that goes into it that it's not even about Jimmy specifically, but more about just the view I have of the league and the NBA specifically and how it operates. So that's just a distinction I wanted to make, and we'll get into everything as it relates to this situation. But I just wanted to explain my perspective a little bit.
Players should get their money. That's your take on it. Players should get.
It's
their
not
money
even just that they get their money, David. It's just that they have a way shorter window to have control over their careers than people realize.
That's fair enough.
And or than people appreciate, maybe.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Butler,
or realize. I agree with you.
Yeah. And Jimmy Butler, and name any player you want, even LeBron James, is not going to play until they're 80 years old. And they just have kind of. It's not pretty. I wish there were better ways to go about it, but I can kind of at least appreciate where the athlete is coming from, 9 times out of 10.
Fair enough.
So 9 times out of 10, You mentioned sort of moments where maybe you didn't totally agree with what Jimmy Butler did. I don't want to rehash who was right and who was wrong. We've had this conversation, and it's old hat at this point. But when you watch the return game on Tuesday night and you see Jimmy Butler not interact with his teammates, it's one thing to say, you know what, I'm anti front office, anti organization. I think that the player, not necessarily saying you're that, but just like the player has his gripes with the people who pay the bills. It's another thing to just not acknowledge the teammates. I mean, what are you feeling in that moment?
To me, more than anything, it was a huge bummer. It was a huge bummer. And, you know, you saw it with the Warriors, right? You saw the way they received Andrew Wiggins. And it's just sad. It's really sad to me. Like, that's the overwhelming feeling for me, is it's a huge bummer that this incredible 5-year run in the organization's history now has such a stain on it, has such negative feelings attached to it, has so many fans who don't like Jimmy Butler, so many fans who hate Jimmy Butler. Some people tweeting, you know, I hope someone gets a hard foul against him. Like,
I heard somebody at the game last night say, rip his head off.
Yeah, it's just a bummer, man. And it's like, to me, it goes like you said, to me, it's beyond this point. Like, who's to blame? Who did more wrong? Who was more annoying? Who was justified? Like, to me, it's just sad to see. You know, like the beauty of pro sports, like when you really think back to the bubble and you hear Spo talk about the fond memories, and you remember Jimmy wearing the high school jerseys of guys at the big game. I remember he told me that summer, like, I have more of those up my sleeve. Like, I'm not telling you how I got them in case I need to do it again. Like, that's really like the beauty of it, right? When people really come together for a common goal and can be greater than the sum of their parts, when they really leave it all out there, when the competition's at their highest and you see people leave it all out there, like the Heat did so many times, like Jimmy and Bam did together so many times. Them as a duo going up against teams that people said were better than them, whether it was the Bucks as the 1 seed, the Celtics, like to know that they went through those battles together and this is where it's ended. It's just sad. And it's unfortunately, like, it's, you saw it, like, it's a bummer. It's also not uncommon, you know, like Jimmy and Bam were not Shaq and Kobe. It happened to Shaq and Kobe. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know. It doesn't feel that. It feels more like it would be the Andrew Wiggins scenario. Maybe not all hugs and jumping up and down, but I don't remember it being, the last time I remember something like this being that icy was Westbrook and Durant.
Yeah.
And it was a little icy in a different direction, but icy nonetheless. It's usually not no eye contact, no interaction whatsoever. That's what was crazy.
It's a bummer. And you know, I have not tried to report on the dynamics there, but I mean, I think it speaks for itself, the way it looks like, and I think I will say, I think a lot of that has to do with the last couple months. And I'm sure there are a lot of players on the team who were like, this ruined our entire season and made us.
He quit on him. They feel like he quit on him.
Yeah, and I'm sure that I'm sure that lack of high five went both ways. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's 2 points here. I think one, I think Jimmy was being a little performative in terms of his refusal to shake hands, because he certainly was showing love to Kevin Love and Alec Burks, and I mean, like, people he doesn't necessarily have a problem, or people that might not necessarily feel as strongly that he betrayed them or something to that effect. But then the flip side of that is, well, we're hearing Jimmy didn't shake everybody's hands. Well, why did Bam reach over there just to squash it, just to be like, I don't care, like, you're gone now, I don't have to deal with you, like, you know, the drama that you kind of started, the fires that you lit, they're out now, and it doesn't really matter. We're all ready to move on. Why didn't he go and shake his hands? Like, is that asking too much of Bam Adebayo, or is it just more convenient to kind of look at Jimmy as the villain and just say, well, he should have been the one to kind of fix things? I don't know.
I just think everyone involved here needs a lot of time to let this thaw out, and that's what it's going to take.
What we saw was authenticity. That's what we saw there. And maybe Jimmy was being a little performative, but that's sort of authentically Jimmy. He's always kind of too cool for school and kind of doing that whole thing. Yeah. But I don't think that Bam, it's an interesting point, and it's something that I was thinking about when Rohan was talking about. I don't think that Bam or Tyler or anybody on the Heat were responsible for approaching Jimmy Butler. They didn't force any of this. They didn't trade Jimmy Butler. They didn't ask to be traded.
But you don't have to reach out like in some kind of exaggerated manner. Everybody shakes hands before the game. Like, you dap them up and you kind of just.
The point I'm trying to make is I know what you mean. Like it is kind of more typical for the former guy to walk over. At the same time, like you saw the Warriors do it with Wiggins, right? It's like it was a two-way street. My point being, I think
Wiggins didn't quit on the team. Wiggins didn't ask for a trade.
sure.
They legitimately felt bad about trading Andrew
Yeah,
Wiggins.
my point just being, I don't think anyone wanted to interact much. I don't
Right.
think anyone wanted to interact much. Like to your point, it was authentic on everyone's side. Like I
Right.
don't think anyone was dying to have a moment that would have felt fake to them. You know,
That's what was so compelling about it, is because the emotions were so raw. This just happened a month and a half ago. If everybody's angry and still a little bit upset, that makes more sense than them just being over it all of a sudden, right? Like so that's what to me was so compelling about it. But yeah, I think you nailed it. It was a bummer just to see it anyway, right? It would be like if you found out that the cast of Seinfeld just hated each other all of a sudden. You'd be like, that would suck. You know,
you guys are really doing a lot of. Wes has really been big on the analogies and metaphors lately. I've realized. I watch all the social clips, guys. Don't worry. Wes has been on top of it with the pop culture references and the analogies lately, and I like it.
It's how we have to cross over, man. Not everybody's dialed in on the Heat right now, so we got to cross over a little bit.
But yeah, it is. It's like, you know, you want to believe that these guys are great teammates. And listen, I've heard stories from Jimmy's teammates about times that he was a great teammate, whether it was Duncan in the bubble, Goran. I mean, I remember a time when Jimmy was asked, how do you feel about Bam Adebayo being the only All-Star from the Heat? And Jimmy said he's the best player on the team. He should be the only All-Star. Like, there were moments that this worked really well, but clearly what happened in the last few months, like, I just think they are all very sick of each other at the moment. And you saw that play out. And it's sad because of what they accomplished when they were at their best.
Well, you mentioned Bam there. I want to talk about Bam because now he is the face of the franchise, right? And so we're going to talk about what that looks like and the next steps for this Heat team. How can they get back to being a competing team in the Eastern Conference? We're going to do that next after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before, because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. Of course, the Sweet 16 getting ready to roll out any day now. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. It's easy and fast with the FanDuel app. Everything is so simple to use it. When I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. That's right, FanDuel.com. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Your favorite NBA team is a free daily newsletter. Introducing the Locked On Heat newsletter, one stop for ultimate Heat and league coverage with local analysis and amazing writing from Katie Heindel, Mike Shearer, and Locked On fantasy basketball tips from Josh Lloyd. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. So what comes next for this Heat team? I think we can kind of go in a few different directions with this topic, but I want to start with Bam, who is the captain of the team. He's the leader of the team. It feels like everybody is following his lead and following his example here. And he had a great game. He simply outplayed Jimmy Butler in that return game. What do you think, Rohan, of Bam as sort of the new face of the franchise? And is that a player capable of taking this team where it wants to go?
I love Bam. I think he's one of my all-time favorite Miami Heat players. And, you know, I tweeted this during the game. Like, he just shows up, man. Like, I'll never forget my old colleague, Michael Pina at SI, asking Eric Spoelstra after, was it game 6 in Boston in 2022? I don't remember the game, but Bam had like 34 and 7 or something crazy, you know, or it might have been the game 4 even when Jimmy didn't play the second half, but it might have been that game 4 where Jimmy didn't play the second half and Miami went on to win. And Michael asked Spo, was that the best performance of Bam's career? And even then Spo wouldn't give it. And he's just like, people look at the box score. He's doing these fake looking at the box score. And he's like, this is what he does every night. Like, he just shows up. He shows up. You know, people are always like, Bam versus Sabonis, Bam versus Towns. Like, everyone has their favorite players. That's fine. But that guy is a certified playoff riser. And against the best competition time and time again, he delivers. So I love Bam.
But
having said all that, I think the obvious answer here is he's not a number one on a championship winner. That doesn't mean he can't be one of the best players on the team. And I think depending on who the number one is, he could be the second best player.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not a number one. And that's the challenge for the Heat right now. That's what this all comes down to. And, whether they had run through this season with Jimmy, whether they had traded him last summer, like we've talked about it on this podcast, guys, and I think we're very sober about this. Like the issue was not like who's wrong, Jimmy or the front office. The issue is the Heat headed into this season did not have a good direction. They were idling. While all their rivals passed them by, they were idling. And the options were go all in around Jimmy and Bam to the best of your ability, or, blow this up and rebuild. And they tried to do neither. And now they've been forced into it. So I think Bam is the kind of guy you keep. He's well-liked around the league. He's had the Olympic experience. Those are all very important things. I think players would play with Bam, and a lot of guys recognize how good and how important he is. Just think about reputations of a guy this is like Rudy Gobert has all those defensive players of the year. Players don't necessarily want to line up to play with him,
right.
For better or for worse. I think he's a good player. But Bam is that guy, and I think he's an important building block for this franchise if they can turn it around in the next couple of years. And that's where it gets tricky, because you're looking at, if the plan is to wait until, let's say, summer of 2027 or whatever the case may be, and Bam's going to be pushing 29, 30. I think Bam's an important piece if you can turn this around quickly.
Yeah. And finding that number one option, you and I, we all agree here, right? Bam, I think fans are a little hard on him because he's not a number one option and he's making max money. And I think that ignores almost everything else about the sport other than the points per game, averages, which is also an important part. But, if you can find somebody that's averaging 27 points per game and line that guy up next to Bam Adebayo, you really got something there, I think. And that's something to build around. So you mentioned already competition passing the Heat by. Before we get to what comes next, is there anything you like since the trade deadline about this Heat team? Are there parts of it that you like that you want to keep? What do you like that's worth holding on to, worth keeping, and worth maybe building on?
One thing that's been frustrating is I thought after the trade, I didn't think they'd be great. I didn't think they'd lose 10 games in a row. I thought the defense would be a little bit more consistent.
Yeah.
And that's been frustrating for everyone to watch. And I'm sure it's probably the number one thing keeping Spo up at night is the fact that they haven't found a way to unlock the defensive potential of this team and be great defensively consistently night in and night out. But I think they have guys who, ironically, if you had Wiggins and Davion Mitchell around Jimmy Butler, that's really interesting.
Right.
I think they have role players. I love Mitchell. I love Davion Mitchell. I think he's been great. There's this idea, can he be a starter? I don't know. Do I think he can be a closer? I think he could be, especially because he's been confident shooting the ball in Miami.
Yes.
He's like the guard version of PJ Tucker, and they've closed important playoff. PJ Tucker has closed important playoff games. Granted, he can guard more positions, but so I love the Mitchell acquisition. I think that's a guy that's really worth keeping around. I do wish Ware got even more minutes, but I think you're seeing him starting to develop and maybe settle into a role. So that's the kind of stuff I think is positive. But their pieces are kind of interesting, but basically all of them need a star to orbit around. And I hate to bring every conversation, go out and get Anthony Edwards, it's like every team wants to do that, certainly. But I would say that's the thing. I want to say I like the defense, but even that has not been there.
It has not been. But if you're looking at then, who's that star? You mentioned that. I think that's fine to say. This team needs a star, and I don't think it's being reductionist when you talk about it that way. I mean, that's the way the league works, right? Yeah. And Kevin Durant is the name that's out there. Is that a fit that you like? Have you heard us talk about Durant?
What's that?
Have you heard us do the Durant thing? Do you know where we stand on Durant?
I haven't. What's your guys' Durant take? Let me hear that first before I jump in.
If you can get him, you get him. I'm not an overthinker when it comes to
David,
this.
are you pro?
Yeah, I'm
sense
not overly
hesitation.
concerned. I'm not overly concerned. Look, the age is a big deal, and I think everybody's like, oh, you were willing to pay. You weren't willing to pay Jimmy the kind of money that KD is going to get. It's like, yeah, different players,
Yeah.
and at different stages of their career. Also, I mean, I don't know. It's just I'm more of a believer of what KD brings to the table that will help kind of unlock everybody else around him on this roster, depending on what you have to give up in order to get him to.
I was very pro KD and was really like a little bit flabbergasted that they just somehow didn't pull it off at the deadline, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't know what Phoenix could have asked for.
I could tell you they asked for all of it.
The kids.
So tell me what's all of it. Tell me what's
all of it.
The pick swaps.
Where Jovic. I don't know if they were
Jaime.
interested in Jaime. I'm assuming he was part of it, but I heard where specifically. And yeah, all the firsts, all the swaps, all of it. I think they got on the phone like, if you want KD, we're going to need all of it. And Miami was like, well, we're not going to give you all of it. We have to have a roster here.
Yeah.
And so that basically was it. The conversations didn't go very far. I do think that the Heat are betting also, though, that
he asks out this summer and the price drops, which I actually think in this situation, I'm usually like, go get the guy. I think that's a smart bet. To hope that he asks out, because I think this season was lost with or without a Kevin Durant. And to your point, it's like they trade for him and they're signing, however many minimum guys it takes to fill out a roster at this point. Yeah. I was very pro KD at the deadline, but to David's point, it's like you're getting maybe a couple years with them, and then you're kind of back in the same boat. And that's not terrible. There are worse places to be than like we had 2 years of Kevin Durant. And, I think he's still playing at an incredibly, incredibly high level. And like David said, it's like people like, oh, you didn't pay Jimmy. Like, I love Jimmy. Durant's the kind of guy they've needed for a long time. It's like, as great as Jimmy is, like a bona fide half-court scorer, I think would just change everyone's life on this team.
Yep.
To me, now I want to get your guys' opinion on this, because my take is I would trade Herro for KD before Wiggins this summer.
Ooh.
This is a really interesting thing to talk about. All right, we're gonna do it after the break. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. The best way to support the show. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. David, would you trade Herro? Let's say that. So let's kind of map it out. Phoenix calls. Phoenix and Miami are on the phone. Phoenix says, "Hey, we need one of Wiggins or Herro plus the contracts and the picks, whatever. Basically, it's the same package, but it's either Herro or Wiggins." So let's just say hypothetically, and this is not how trade calls work, but hypothetically, that's the scenario sitting in Pat Riley's desk. What do you think?
I can't bring myself to think. I don't know. To me, it feels like Herro would be the more complementary player to KD too. I guess you're sacrificing a lot defensively because KD, a solid defender, not great at this stage. But I think I could see. I guess Rohan, your point is that you're going to get a pretty good score in Wiggins, or you're going to keep a pretty good score in Wiggins, but you're also going to get theoretically elite level defense, and you can switch more easily, and you won't be victimized the same way you have when Tyler's out on the floor. Is that like the basis for your argument? To me, it's just, I don't know, like to give up such a young player and one who's continually building and has gotten better this year, and I think could still be a building block, if not necessarily your star. It's tough to kind of, I just don't see Wiggins in the same level, at the same tier as what Herro is. Here's
the real question. And this is where we love the NBA, but it is a business. As the Miami Heat learned this year, it is a business. Tyler Herro becomes extension eligible this summer. What do you do if Tyler Herro asks for the max?
He's going to ask for the max.
Do the Heat give it to him? Do they get into a standoff with Herro? Is he willing to accept less?
So the thing with the Tyler Herro contract extension is both sides can kick the can down the road to next summer. We don't really see players actually, when they become extension eligible at this point in the contract, actually do the whole extension thing. Most people usually just go the next year.
Sure, but we also seen the pitfalls of the kick the can down the road. strategy with this team in particular. Now to your point, like, years of service, like there's a lot going on with Tyler. Like he doesn't have like a player option on his last year that would get ripped up, but we also see guys do sign the extension. And even if you do kick the can down the road, like then what if he asks for the max? Like, here's my argument for trading Herro over Wiggins is one. It's hard to imagine Tyler's trade value ever being higher than it is right now. And maybe trading Tyler also saves you either a pick or one of these young guys in the trade. So that's problem one. That's part one. Part two, I have seen with my own two eyes Andrew Wiggins be a top 3 player on a championship team.
Right.
And as great as Steph Curry was on the 2022 Golden State Warriors, that's not like really regarded as an all-time team, a great team. I mean, that's Klay Thompson post Achilles, post ACL, no Kevin Durant.
Wiggins was the second best player in that series for Golden State.
For his defense on Jason Tatum. Guess who's still going to be a problem in the conference? Jason Tatum. His defense on Luka Doncic. Like,
so you're talking me into this because I think in a vacuum, if you ask who's the better basketball player, Tyler Herro or Andrew Wiggins, no question, Tyler Herro is the better basketball player, I think, at this point. But with the Wiggins, he's more versatile. He unlocks a lot of different things. Steve Kerr used to talk about that a lot. You're even hearing Spo start talking about that a lot. But the key point I think that you brought up, and maybe the most important thing here, is the contract extension.
Yes.
Is if you get a sense from Tyler Herro that, hey, look, you tried to trade me 3 different times or whatever many times it was. I want to get paid on the end of this thing. Jimmy's no longer here. It's me and Bam's team. I expect to be treated as the leader that I am of this group. And the trade value, even if he doesn't get the extension this summer, he's going to have to get that extension. Like, that's the conversation with Tyler Herro next summer. So even if he takes that one other leap this coming year, now you're dealing with an extension if you're a team that is potentially trading for Tyler Herro that you might not want to be dealing with at that point. So you might be right. I don't know that I can get all the way there with you because I still like the idea of, okay, it's Kevin Durant, Bam, and Wiggins. Like,
that's
Durant
a hell of a front court to me.
It's just, it feels like you're not back to the same place because Durant is obviously a superior offensive player than Herro, but there's just still not much offensive juice on that team that I worry about. I agree.
And look, they'd have to find a way once again to fill out the roster, but just look at the way the league is going. Like, the Celtics are already, like, their owner who just sold the team grade came out and said, like, you can't stay in the second apron. No. Your Bam is going to be making $50 million. KD is going to be making $50 million. You're probably going to have to give KD an extension for a year or two if you sign him. So it's not like the Heat can't go into it, but it's like, who do you go into it for? Right. Wiggins has already taken a discount. Like, his last Warriors deal, he's getting paid less than Herro right now. And I think you could make the case that he'll come back on a similar number. Like, we're talking about a $20 million difference that helps you go out and get players. And we've seen them, frankly, be hamstrung in the offseason with weird contracts where it's like, you remember the year they came off the Nuggets finals, it was like they either only had max players and Kyle Lowry or like no contracts. And it's like they just couldn't make any moves. Like, right. To me, it's so complicated outside of just basketball fit because of how you build the roster around a hypothetical Durant trade. And like I said, like, if you trade Herro, maybe that's the difference between keeping, a Jovic or a Hawkes or whoever that is, that either maybe gets you a pick back to get another player. Maybe that's the person that allows you to get off Rozier. There's just, to me, the downstream effects of keeping Wiggins, I think, outweigh the difference in what it would mean to keep Herro, even though I think he's having a great year and is a better player. But like, when you're talking about third guy on a championship team and what that player is worth and how much you want to pay them and what they can do, I've just seen Wiggins do it. I've seen Wiggins do it. That goes a long way for me. And beyond that, like, I just think the fit cap wise and basketball wise almost makes more sense to me.
Before we let you go here, Rohan, I do want to get your take on this LeBron sound from his interview with Pat McAfee on Wednesday, where he starts talking about his time with the Miami Heat.
One thing about Rouse, he don't give a about nothing. Listen, if it ain't about that Heat shield and covering that Heat culture, I mean, we see what's going on now. I mean, well, not anymore, but we see Jimmy and, it was at one point where even I left and it was time for D-Wade to get paid and he didn't want to pay D-Wade and D-Wade left. I was like, when that happened, I was like, when Wade County had to leave and go to Chicago, I looked at the Cookie situation. I was like, maybe it wasn't that bad.
So Cookie Gate, besides the point, he goes ahead and says basically if it's not about the Heat logo or Heat culture that Pat Riley isn't interested in whatever that is. Would you say that that's a fair assessment of Riley's behavior during the Jimmy Butler saga?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's proven out. Yeah, I would say. Yeah, not even the Jimmy Butler scenario. I mean, like I said, like I feel like we don't even like it. It's kind of under discussed in part because I think of how gracious he's been and he came back. But like, they let Dwayne Wade out the door. And him and Pat Riley didn't talk that summer. I'll never forget. It was like literally my first big story for Sports Illustrated. I'm sitting down with Dwayne Wade at the Bulls media day. He's done the whole thing and he's sitting down with us for this big interview. It's my first big magazine story. And like, I think I audibly gasped when he was like, I spoke with Nick Harrison. Like I didn't speak with Pat Riley that summer. And I was like, what? Like, I literally almost dropped like what the bleep? Like, what do you mean? This whole time been sold like this is a family dinner. And like, Pat has expressed regret certainly about the way he handled that summer. And they've reconciled since. They've literally vacationed together since. And I think Dwayne is obviously still fond of the Heat in many ways, but they let like literally what more could Dwayne Wade have done to get like the Kobe farewell contract? And like people can come out here and be like, oh, that's bad business. You shouldn't do that. Like, I would have taken those years of Dwayne Wade versus the product they put out on the floor after that. And just beyond that, like I want to see my favorite players on my favorite teams. Like I would have hated to see Dirk Nowitzki in a different jersey. I would have hated to see Kobe Bryant in a different jersey. Like we had to see Dwayne Wade in a Bulls and Cavs jersey. Like
Cavs one was really sad.
Brutal. Like, so, I think it's proven to be true time and time again, not just with Jimmy. And, in some ways, like that's why the Heat are a really well-run organization. In other ways, like it leads to situations that can be a huge bummer. And like letting the guy who, multiple rings, sacrifice money time and time again. Dwayne Wade was the highest paid player on the Heat once in his entire career. We're talking to not just a franchise legend, like an all-time top 75 NBA legend. Like you let that guy walk? Like, so I think LeBron is spot on. I don't think that's a new thing that we just learned. And
it's something that we continue to have to learn, right? Whether it's with Dwayne or Jimmy Butler, or, we mentioned Tyler Herro, that contract extension, Bam Adebayo, when this contract is up. I mean, every time, as long as Pat Riley's in charge, the Heat are going to come first. And again, I don't know that that's a bad thing. I just think it's a lesson that everybody needs to understand and recognize. Like I'm not trying to get into politics here, but it's almost like capitalism, right? It's just like, look, this is the system we have. There's really good parts of it. There's obviously flaws about it, but you just kind of have to pick something and go with it and stick to it. And that's sort of what the Heat have done here. And so a lot of things really does work, and that's why they're respected around the league, because of Heat culture and the way that Pat Riley runs this thing. But there's obviously the other side of it too. And if you could say one thing about Pat Riley and the Heat, it's they're going to stick to it. They have a plan and they're going to stick to it. They're not going to overpay guys. They're going to put the organization before the players. Doesn't matter. In a star-driven league, it feels like something very different.
Keep the main thing, right? Isn't that what he always says? But except the main thing is the franchise and not necessarily
keep the Heat culture, the Heat culture, and nothing else. Ron, we always love talking to you, man. We really appreciate it. You can find his work over at NBC News. You could find him on this podcast that we just recorded, which is a weird thing to say at the end of this thing. But thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime, guys. Anytime.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.